Okay, today is Thursday, October 6th, and I just finished the first section of the elevator control. You can see this long rod all the way over to that's still clecoed in. So basically all there is to this is just putting those two bolts in. You got to cut this to size. It's about, I don't know, 4 inches, maybe 5 inches too long. So you need to cut it to size, and the easiest way I found to drill those two holes was to use a step drill bit, just to make the initial hole. I actually made two, one on top of each other, and then I used a die grinder to make them perfectly oval like that. And I just used a rasp bit to grind out the aluminum. You don't need to get expensive bits; it's just for aluminum. So that made this job probably 100 times easier. So the die grinder made that pretty quick. Made pretty quick work of that. So on this end, that bolt obviously isn't permanent yet, and I certainly didn't put the pin in it yet. I should also mention that is screwed onto a threaded rod end that is welded onto the end of that pipe. I had to remount that pipe quite a bit to get it to fit, but once I got it in there and cut out the notches, welding it was pretty easy. Ground it down, smoothed it out, painted it, and that's it. Super duper easy. Next job is the piece that goes from there to there, and once that is done, I finally start working on the tail section, and it really starts looking like a plane. Okay, today is Wednesday, November 9th. And haven't been super busy with the plane. I've got a bunch of yard work, and I had to build an entire shed and fill it full of wood before it starts getting really cold here in Northern Virginia. So I got this piece done that goes on the end of this long pole, which I've already finished this part. So that's the piece that goes through a fairly significant hole in the back there, and of course it attaches on the other side here with this one that isn't screwed on to there yet. So the way this is accomplished is you cut this tube to size. It's about, I don't know, 2 or 3 inches longer than it needs to be. So yeah, you cut it to size, and then you build the longer version of this, and then this one, and this sits in about 2 inches, well, exactly 2 inches, and then you just bolt it on, and this tube. So this tube is literally just squished from the sides to. It's kind of hard to get in there. It's just squished in the sides to attach to the tube. It's just a simple, elegant solution. And this, of course, will go on the other end, which I haven't done yet. Actually takes a fair amount of work because like I don't have any custom presses or anything, so I was able to use a vise on this side, and then I just repainted all the scratches and stuff from the vise. So you can use a vise to do it. Just be careful where you're putting the vise, or you'll squish the wrong part. But it's one thing that I did encounter is you got to put quite a bit of pressure on the aluminum because it'll kind of bounce back. And these bolts are, there's only about, with this black paint on, it's kind of hard to tell, and I just finished painting it, so it's even worse because it's so glossy. But there's only about, I don't know, maybe a millimeter, maximum 2 millimeters of thread remaining. Now there's what are the AN310A bolts for this one, which to me doesn't make any sense. Maybe I'll have an epiphany when I go to install it. But this one here is the exact same thickness as this one, and the other bolts, why are they shorter? Because it's the exact same it's the exact same thing. Why would they supply shorter bolts for this one compared to that one? It's literally the same thing, just one of these is shorter than the other. So if those 10A bolts end up being too short, I'll just have to order some more 12A bolts, because like I had to squish this together quite a bit just to get the bolts through. You know, then when you get the nuts on, you can just force it in by tightening it down. But yeah, there's only about a couple of millimeters there, so it'll be interesting to see if those other bolts are actually long enough, and I really don't think they will be. So this is the elevator that comes from Bede, and it's mostly ready to go. I'll have to look at the plans to see how much extra work there is to finishing it. But as far as, you know, it being shaped properly and everything, it's all just ready to go. And all of the move this out of the way. Like all of the guts on the inside are also part of the piece, so you don't have to do any of that. It's already pro-sealed together and everything, so that's nice. Okay, today is Sunday, November 13th, and all I've really gotten done today is that bolted in. It was just being held on by Clecos before. I don't know if I mentioned it before or not, but there's a couple little holes in there. Those are for cables to run through for the rudder control that are in one of the later steps. So as far as the elevator goes, that little piece is done. That's 5 minutes work. So this is a significantly longer amount of work. So that piece was on before. I just finished painting the part that I couldn't paint before, and this smaller piece is on now, and the same process I did for the other one works on here. The drawing, I think I mentioned it in a previous video, the drawing calls for AN3-10 bolts, and there's no way in hell that those are ever going to work. I ran out of AN12s. These are AN13s on the end, but you need AN12s for this end. I don't know why they're specified AN10, because it's the exact same width as the other one. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, the AN12s are plenty long enough, so I'm going to have to order some more AN12 bolts to finish that off and take the 13s out of there, because the 13s are used in other parts of the fabrication. So that's pretty much all that's done here. I painted the bottom side of this that didn't get a real good coat of paint yet, and finished attaching that. So that's really all I did. And somebody's starting up their plane, so now's a good time to stop. Okay, today is Friday, November 25th. So this is all finally hooked up. When I started hooking this together, like this rod and this large piece that goes all the way to the end here, that bolt isn't the bolt that goes in there, by the way. A random bolt that was long enough and too skinny skinnier than the actual one, just to make it easy to put in and out, just so I could test the swivel. So when I was hooking this together, I noticed that this swayed quite a bit, and I went back through the drawings, and there is no specification for mounting this top part here to anything, and I had this fairly large 2 by 2 inch angle that was just left over from something else. So I bolted it to the frame here on both sides, and made a spacer to go in there. I need some proper size bolts, but now it's nice and solid, and it doesn't. This part here doesn't rock back and forth when you're moving the controls. I just looked at that and like, that doesn't that doesn't seem right. Maybe with more of the stuff that's going to go on later. There's some what is it, Delrin, the plastic pieces that go in there for the push-pull cable and stuff like that. It might make it a little stronger, but there's really nothing reinforcing this here from flexing. So with this on here, that swivel is rock solid now. So I'm gonna leave it there. It's that's a deviation from the design, but it makes the controls so much more solid. I don't know if I can show it here, but if I see if I can put my phone over here. So I'm reaching over here and moving the elevator back and forth, and you can see it's not flexing at all. Before it was moving back and forth about, quarter of an inch or so, and that just didn't seem right. So the elevator and ailerons are done now, or at least the controls are, I should say. So I've still got to drill holes here for the pins that go in here, and I want to take this off, and there still seems to be, it's hard to get in there with my phone, but back it out a little bit, see if I can get it to focus. So there still seems to be a little bit of a friction there that shouldn't be there, so I'm going to take it off and see what I can do about that, see if something isn't slightly aligned, or maybe it needs to be reamed a little bit, or whatever. But this fits very, very tight, so there's no doubt that it's rubbing on something, because when I move the elevator I can feel it moving. There is a little bit of friction here. You can see I put some grease on there, but there's a little bit of friction on here, and it's very likely due to this. It's about half a degree off. It was just barely off of like this here. If you look at this here, that needs to be that's obviously squished to make it flat to fit that this piece inside here, and this has to be exactly in line with this one here, and it is, but it's off by about maybe half a degree. It's just barely off center. Not enough that it made it difficult to put on, but it could be twisting it just enough to make a little bit of a squeak when you move when the metal rubs against each other. I may have to take it off and just twist it slightly, or maybe change the angle of some of those bolts. But it's still pretty solid. Like when I move this back, there's no play. It's easy to move. The only issue is you can hear that slight squeaky noise and I'm almost positive it's that those pieces rubbing together, because that piece is just slightly not perfectly in line with the one on the end. So when you're building that part, I would be super, super careful and keep measuring, make sure it's absolutely perfectly accurate. I did that, and I was still about half a degree off. So it's pretty picky because there is zero tolerance both on the top and on the not necessarily the ball joint there, but the that swivel that mounts on the long this piece here. The swivel that mounts on that, there's no tolerance. They're right up against each other. There's no play at all, which is why I put some grease in there, but it's still squeaky a little bit. So it's obviously just slightly twisted, enough to make a little bit of noise. So I may just have to live with it. Maybe put some very thin washers in there. I'm not sure yet. I'm certainly not going to redo everything for just being half a degree off. So this spacer is actually, you can't really tell, but that spacer is actually two pieces of metal. One was 0.0625 and the other one was 0.125, I believe. I didn't have something that was the combination of those thicknesses. I suppose I could have used 3.0625 pieces, but that's the exact space from this piece here and this piece here. So that keeps it perfectly straight and solid as a rock. This is probably massive overkill. I probably could have used a much smaller one, but I had a large piece of this. I figured if we're going to make it strong, let's make it strong. So this is never going to move. The only thing that's going to move is that side and that side, which is what you want. So maybe it's overkill, but I didn't like the fact that it was moving when I was testing everything. So I put that piece in. That's not part of the design. And this piece here, it's it's almost comical. It's so big, but it's what I had, and now it's super strong, and it adds almost no weight. So that's the controls for the elevator. The next step, now that this is completely done, is this tail fin. And the rudder that goes on the back here. With the rudder part has to be built. This came already assembled and glued together and everything. There's nothing to do. Well, I say nothing to do, but it's all pre-made. So this needs to be primed. I'm not going to do that today, but this does need to be primed, and I need to get started on both the, I believe the rudder is the first piece that has to be made, and then there's the elevator that goes on afterwards. It's actually fairly complicated. There's a piece that goes up here with some counterweights. The rudder itself, and then there's another piece down there with a little crank swivel thing that goes on the bottom. So that's left to do, and of course drill these this post. Well, I'm going to take it off. I'm going to take this off and make sure that there's nothing grinding against. Like right now that. Like it's easy to move with the controls, but it's pretty stiff. Like I can't just grab this and I can just barely turn it. So there's with the friction down there combined with the friction here is enough to make it really difficult to move. And granted, it's going to be difficult to move anyway because there's absolutely no leverage on this side, but. Still, it should be a little bit smoother than that, so I'm going to take it off and make sure everything is honed as much as possible to make it as little friction as possible. I'd like the controls to be just like buttery smooth by the time I'm done, and it'll take a little while to get this primed and everything, and the rudder constructed, so I've got lots of time to deal with that. And Christmas is coming up, and I'll have a crap ton of time to to get working on that as well. So I was hoping to be doing taxi testing by now, but obviously that's not going to happen. I don't even have an engine yet, but it is coming along. It's not coming along as fast as I thought it would, but it's coming along. The other part of this that needed to be done is you need to ream out a hole for this. So the control stick is all the way forward now, and that's how much room is on the bottom. So I would guess just a tad over a quarter of an inch of space, and the same here. So the about a quarter of an inch, maybe a little more, and a little bit too much on the top here. That's a good. Get the camera here. That's a good. It's probably more than half an inch. It's probably half an inch and an eighth or so. It's a little too much, but it's not the end of the world. One thing that's different on my build as well is the drawings don't call for a. I think it's a spacer right here. I put that in, so this is pretty thick. So using this guy, I went through one bit because they're not really, they're more wood bits than they are for aluminum, but they're super cheap. So I was able to ruin one of them and then use another one, and I got the job done. Aluminum's reasonably soft, so those bits worked okay. To get metal bits, they're stupid expensive, so I just used the wood bits from Harbor Freight, and they worked fine. Home Depot didn't have any. So I think that's that's the other side of that. If I hadn't shown it already, again, those bolts aren't permanent. They're too long. That's just what I had. I was going to rivet it, but rivets don't really make sense for such a thick application, so I just used bolts with locking nuts. And one of these days I'll order some proper bolts. And these are just hardware store bolts. They're not AN bolts, so I'll see if I can get some that are the same size as that and bolt it down properly, but for now it'll hold it in place. The next job is this guy here, and the building the rudder on the back and putting it all together, and then building the elevator. The elevator is also mostly put together, but the only reason this one is out of its package is because I was getting ready to prime it, but I didn't have time tonight, so this will be prepped possibly tomorrow and primed, and that may be all I'll do tomorrow, so we'll see. Okay, today is November 28th, Monday. So I've got this elevator control rod extended all the way down to swivel here, and so it connects to that swivel there. Kind of they overlap each other, and then this large piece extends all the way down there, so it comes to here, and then it swivels on here. So that's the other side of it. So this extension here is basically just flattened ends on each side. It's a 2-inch diameter aluminum tube with these manufactured parts here. That's wood inside of two aluminum pieces that you have to make. And then same over here. There's this one's a little harder to see. Under here, if I can get it in there, it's a little scratched up from working on it, but You can see there's a smaller, also manufactured piece from wood and 2 aluminum pieces that go on the end of there. So originally, I'd taken a lot of care to make sure that that both of these sides, because they have to be exactly in line with each other for obvious reasons. And this one was like just a little bit off. It was just a little bit of an angle, and it just bugged me enough that I had to take it off and kind of reform it just slightly. It wasn't off by much, but it was off enough to bug me. So now they're perfectly straight. The reason I put that there is because when you move the, I'll go over here. So when you move this here, I don't know if the camera, I'll try to get the camera. So when you move the control back and forth, I'm moving this back and forth. So when you move that back and forth, the top of that mount that holds the swivel was just moving too much. I really didn't like the fact that it was moving around. There's some other parts left to go in here for the trim cable, so that'll give it a little bit of stiffness, but I honestly don't think it would be enough to keep it perfectly still. So this piece in here keeps it perfectly rigid, anchored to these 2 solid frame points here. So I just attached this with the proper sized AN bolts, and I had to actually make, you can't tell because they're kind of sort of brazed together, but not really. You just can't see the transition, but there's actually 2 pieces of metal. I didn't have, I had a piece that was 0.0625 and one that was 0.125. And together they're a perfect thickness. So I just glued them together and then shaped them to the exact same size. Those are hardware store bolts. I need to get some proper AN bolts like these, but I didn't have any of the nice AN bolts for that were that small, and it's the thickness is too deep for any of the rivets that I have. Although rivets might, I don't know if you can rivet something that thick, but if it's possible, I'll look it up and then possibly just replace those with larger rivets. It doesn't need to be super strong. It just needs to keep this from moving when you swivel it back and forth. There's not a ton of force on that. Of course, once the rudder's on there and it's actually flying, yeah, there probably will be enough force on there to make this a lot more necessary. But anyway, that's not part of the drawing, or it's not part of the design. I put that in there because it really bothered me that top part was moving back and forth when I was testing the controls. So this, if I can get the phone in, kind of get both of them in the shot. This is really hard to do. I don't know if you can really see it anyway, but I got full travel there. It is nice and smooth. I got all the wrinkles figured out, all the friction points. There's nothing impeding it. It's really easy to move. There was one spot that was problematic, and that's why this piece here is missing, and I'll show you that in a bit. You can see the rub marks. I had actually, when I was first testing this, I had it upside down, so there's one mark on one side and one mark on the other side. So I thought that it was rubbing here from when it was misaligned. And that was one of the other things that was bugging me, is there was a little bit of a squeak there because this wasn't perfectly straight. It is now. And then it was still squeaking. I'm like, no, this is absolutely perfect. Why is this still squeaking? Because the whole frame just resonates whenever there's anything squeaking connected to it. So it just very vaguely, it seemed like the squeak was always coming from there, but what it was doing was just barely touching the. So this is the next angle in line. So there's a smaller one here that I cut. I'm just repriming it, so it's not on yet. But it was just barely touching. So I just cut a little bit of a circle out of the top to keep it from touching the metal, and the squeak was gone magically. So there was one other issue. I thought there was some. Get the camera to focus here. Okay, so I've got a light in here now. So originally I thought it was touching on here, but you can see there's a very slight gap. Get this position so I can see. So there was a very slight gap in there. So that wasn't what was causing the friction. What it was you can see these polish marks here. So you can see where I polished those two. I think this one might have been a little bit more than this one, but anyway, I had to polish those a little bit, or grind them down, whatever you want to call it. So this was no longer touching. You can see where the paint was rubbed off there. Get the camera back a little bit. Let's see if it'll get it to focus. But anyway, you can see where the paint was scratched a little bit from that little bit touching. It doesn't touch now. It's really close, but it's not actually touching. So that is. I don't know if maybe I can get the camera in there. It's just so hard because there's no place to put the camera. You can see there's a small, tiny little gap there. It's really hard to tell, but there is a gap there now, and I didn't have to take too much material off. It was just barely touching, but it was enough friction that you'd hear kind of just a very slight, I wouldn't say grinding sound, but you could feel something was touching, and it wasn't smooth, especially towards this top side. I didn't really have to do anything with the bottom side. It was all just, this was just slightly too thick to. This was just slightly too thick to get it to move smoothly without touching anything. So this swivel is all done. This extension part is all done. The swivel is all done. There may need to be some adjustment with that screw-on rod end, that swivel on the end of there. I'll have to figure that out more once I get the tail on and see where the range of motion is. It may be just slightly off, either too far out or too far in, but we'll see. And of course, this is in. I'm still leaving the covers off of the bucket here because I still need to put the console in here, and the console doesn't really matter, but I need to run a push-pull cable from the trim control that sits on top of the console, or goes through the console, to run through here, and there's some holes in the bottom there. I believe the push-pull cable goes through one of those. Actually, no, that's for the rudder cables. The push-pull cable, I believe, either is mounted up here or is higher up on that. I'll have to look at the drawings, but anyway, those two holes are for the cable that go out to the rudder that's connected to these to this spot here that doesn't have anything connected to it yet. So I think that is about it. So I started with the vertical stabilizer, just getting initial primer on it. It may only need one coat. It went on fairly thick. I used that roller again. That Eastwood Optiflow primer, when you use the roll-on, I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of a, when you first put it on, there's a bit of an orange peel, but it just really levels out nicely over time. There was even more of an orange peel on here than there is now, and that was I just finished painting it like, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes ago. Typically it'll smooth down to this finish here, because I didn't sand this at all. I mean, it's kind of dirty now, and there's always dust here in the hanger that falls down on it, but like this nice flat matte finish of the primer is basically what you'll get on here. And you see this shiny kind of orange peel, and mind you, this is mounted vertically. It's not sitting on a table like the floor was, but I expect it to flow similarly. Obviously there's going to be some drip down, but we'll see. Hopefully I don't get too many points that I have to sand smooth, because this is one of the actual surfaces that's going to be exposed to the outside elements. So this needs to be perfect. So if the primer doesn't dry perfectly smooth, and there's always a little bit of sanding you have to do, but this one especially, I'll make sure that it's absolutely perfectly smooth and even use. Actually, that's a good time to show that. So this came in the kit that I got with these two. These are almost done. So if you're planning on priming both the frame and the skins, this Eastwood kit that comes with the Optiflow catalyst and the primer, and I believe this roller came with it, and a bunch of extra rollers. It also comes with this can of guide coat. I haven't really used it yet. I used it once just to see how well it worked. So it's very, very easy to sand. It comes off very easily. So you basically paint, and it's mainly meant for cars where you want just an absolutely perfectly spotless, absolutely immaculate finish. You would spray this stuff onto the primed surface, so you can tell where the low and high spots are. Now this is a giant, very thin piece of aluminum, so there's going to be low and high spots regardless. And it's not like a car where you can where everything is really solid underneath it. I can't touch it, but you can. You know, the metal will move if you were to like poke right here. If you were to push it, it would go in. So there's very likely, you know, it's going to be impossible to find high and low spots like that, but it will let me be able to see, you know, where the primer didn't dry perfectly flat. And I am going to use the same roller technique with some boat paint. I may probably mention that in one of the other videos. I'm going to use some roll-on boat paint, and there's a technique where you can use to you basically sand it and polish it and sand it and polish it until you get very close to a you know, a spray booth job, but it's significantly cheaper. You know, you take this whole thing into a spray booth, you know, you could be looking at 10 grand. It's not going to cost anywhere near that to do the whole plane using the roll-on. And I believe you don't even need a respirator for that stuff. You might, I can't remember what it's made out of, but regardless, you can roll it on and then polish it and get a very nice finish. So this is the primed tail piece, the vertical stabilizer. And this is that piece that I had to cut a little divot out of so it wouldn't rub on that piece. If you're watching this video and saying, why didn't he just check that? Well, because I didn't. And it was, yeah, you can see from the rub marks, it was just barely touching. And I just left like less than a quarter of an inch in that divot that you saw on the piece that I cut out. So maybe it's unavoidable, maybe it's not, but after everything was said and done, it was just barely touching that. So I just cut a small divot out of that last bracket, and it's not going to affect the strength. I mean, this whole tail section is made out of you can see it's crazy solid, and I imagine it's kind of over engineered, partially because you can also make a tail wheel and put a plate right there. So, and that was something I was originally going to do, was make it so I could put like 2 buckets in here and then decide, okay, I'm just going to have a tail wheel now. And after doing all the work to put this together, I'm like, no, I'm okay with a tricycle gear. That's just too much to do. So the other thing that I finished off was I finally got the bushings for the back there that I didn't have before. I do have bushings for this. I need to widen those holes just a little bit, and then put a bushing in there, and I need a little piece of Delrin or something on that part where the cable goes over, just so it isn't rubbing on the metal. It just, there again, it just barely touches, but it does touch. I don't want it touching. So the rest of this is kind of good to go. Okay, today is December 2nd, Friday, and all I really did today was go over this. I sanded down a few lumpy spots, as opposed to the the frame where, if there's a few drip marks, I really don't care because you're never going to see it. But this is actually, this is the part that's exposed to the environment. So I sanded down all the high spots and gave a very thin second coat over top. Most of it was actually okay. It's still a little bit wet. You can kind of see the orange peel there. Some of that goes away. Most of it doesn't. So I'll probably give that a very light sanding when it comes time to paint it. And then the paint will probably have a slight orange peel as well, and that'll need to be polished. But from the little bit of research that I've done on the and I don't have the name of that boat paint that I'm going to be using, but it evens out even better than this primer does. So when it'll have a slight orange peel to it, depending on the roller you use, but it really evens out nicely, and once you polish it, it looks really good. But once I roll that on, I'm going to give it a good polish, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what that looks like, because I can't remember the name of the channel. It's some boat channel, and the guy was doing the hull of a boat, and it just looked great, and it was really high quality paint too. It wasn't just garbage rattle can stuff. So I also painted over that little scratch mark that was on there. It was just bothering me, so it probably will need a second coat, just to completely cover it up. But it was just bugging me, so I just rattle canned it. I can't put I could, but I don't want to put the flooring back in until I get both the rudder cables done and that push-pull cable for the rudder trim. I'll need to wait until the console is put in there, because the elevator trim control mounts inside of that. At least the elevator and ailerons are done. The rudder is sort of done, but it's not hooked up to anything. This will take a couple days to completely dry. It's usually dry in a day, but it's a little cooler, and it's just barely warm enough to even be doing this in the first place. So I'm going to give that a good day, probably 2, to completely dry before I start messing with it. I found the easiest way to, I'm sure there's better ways of doing it or other ways of doing it, but there's two mounts on here, this one here and this one here. I had a leftover piece of square aluminum and I just clamped this down onto my table, and then I put a clamp on here, and this is just a 2x4 clamp to the sawhorse, and then it fits in there and it keeps it reasonably solid. It's not going to fall over or anything while the paint is drying. So that worked out pretty well, and being mounted close to the edge here, I can get at the whole thing without any trouble. So that worked out pretty good. So I don't know if you can see that or not, but I'm moving the elevator back and forth, and this is just buttery smooth now. I'm so happy I spent the time to get this all right, because nothing rubs, everything's perfectly straight, it's nice and smooth. That thing doesn't rock back and forth. It's just silent. It's just so perfect. I did put some grease in there. Probably hard to see, but I kind of slathered some grease in there just in case there's any metal rubbing going on. Also, some grease down on here and in there. These ends still need to be drilled and pinned, and I haven't put any pins in any of these castle nuts. I haven't put any pins in these or that one or any of the ones for the ailerons. So all of those will need to be pinned once I'm done all the controls. I don't want to pin stuff because there's been more than once I had to take stuff out and realign it and adjust things and whatever. And with the pin in there, it just makes it a pain in the ass for no reason when I know there's a possibility of it coming out. So none of those are pinned yet. The only ones that are pinned are these ones back here, because I know they don't need any further work. So those are already done. So anyway, that is the progress for December 2nd. Thanks for watching.